Welcome, everyone. This is part two of the Octaves relationships between personal planets, Mars, Venus, and Mercury, and the outer transpersonal planets, Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune. So I have already explored how the Mars-Pluto octave relationship unfolded and what it's based upon. And in this second episode, I'm going to focus on Mercury Uranus octave relationship. So I hope this will help you better understand astrology, but also this is a tool that I'm using personally to better understand chart analysis. As you may know, I'm leading an educational program, a diploma program that covers chart analysis, which is the hardest part of astrology because it's easy to study the bits and pieces. It's very challenging to synthesize everything, to know how a whole chart works together. So this program is very rich, but you can study incrementally through 4 different tracks. But it covers really understanding the soul journey, understanding the most existential questions of why we are here. What is this life about? And then to address the most practical questions such as, what's my financial situation like? How can I improve it? And my relationships and health and all the day-to-day concerns. So we start from these larger existential questions to the more personal, immediate, and perhaps mundane concerns. This is a very rich program, and part of this octave formula that I'm using, that I'm describing in this video, is definitely implemented in chart analysis. And so it's part of the material I'm teaching. If you resonate with this approach, I'm sure that this program will speak to you. And check it out on my website, mauricefernandez.com. So let's review what the octaves are about. Before they discovered and created telescopes, astronomers, astrologers refer to the rulership association between signs and planets all the way up to Saturn. Saturn is the last visible planet. So the sun and moon was associated with Cancer and Leo. And then the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which are all rocky planets, were associated with the sign next to the sun and moon. And so Mercury for Gemini, Virgo, then the next one, the next pair is Taurus, Libra for Venus, and then Aries, Scorpio for Mars. Then we move to the social planets, Jupiter for Pisces, Sagittarius, and Saturn for Aquarius, Capricorn. Then in the 18th century, 1700s, the first planet that was not visible with the naked eye, Uranus, was discovered by William Herschel. In the 19th century, Neptune was discovered, and in the 20th century, Pluto was discovered. And immediately they were associated rulerships with Aquarius, Pisces, and Scorpio, respectively. And this, of course, challenged the established neat order that existed before between rulerships and signs. And of course, today there's a lot of debate about whether that is justified or not. And to me, of course, it is absolutely justified, not only because it's fancy and it's something that I've been studying just because my teacher told me that this is it, but because I see it working. And we'll touch on that in this discussion. But I just want to review briefly. If we look at the natural order of the signs and assigned rulership, we're going to talk this time about Uranus ruling Aquarius as the higher octave of Mercury ruling Gemini and Virgo. So personal planets relate to our function, to the descent into time and space, and to the need to basically function in this dimension, how we get food, how we take care of ourselves, how we overcome challenges, face predators, overcome diseases. So how we basically establish ourselves in this world, in this dimension. So starting from Mars and Aries, life begins as a battle. And so we, we immediately have to start developing our skills, developing our strength. And as Mars is a fire archetype related to Aries, it has to do with the need to assert our will. And the first imperative of Mars is the will to exist, the will to survive. So from a Mars point of view, it represents our deepest self-preservation instinct. And so it continues with Venus, with finding food, connecting to the land. Where do we find food? The soil, the earth provides. And so it's the connection with natural resources, management of resources, and the ability to eventually develop agriculture so we can find food security. Mercury, which we are going to expand upon this time, has to do with understanding our world, with the mental faculties to discern, to observe, and to figure out what we can do, how this world functions. So Mercury has to do initially with the need to understand what was initially mysterious. Realize that Gemini naturally squares Pisces. Pisces is the great mystery, the things that we're born into. I know we're born into a world where the sky is blue and the trees are green and the sun is shining, but we don't really know where it began and how it operates. So Mercury is kind of our first attempt to understand and figure things out. And we're going to unpack this more as we go along. And so this continues then with the sun and moon and grounding ourselves, finding our purpose, realizing where we can find our own identity in this greater scheme of things. So the sun and moon has to do with our personal story, with our name and our identity and what we are doing, whether we are going to be doctors or a carpenter or a plumber, and what's, how many kids we're going to have. So anything that pertains to our personal story is in the sun and moon. And that also informs us about not just who we are, but what are we doing with our lives. So the ability to produce, to participate, and to co-create in this world is part of the sun-moon influence and function. And then we continue with Virgo and the other side of Mercury, which has to do with not only learning and figuring things out, but organizing our lives so that we may function. So Mercury has to do with the logistical organization and scheduling and preparing. So the Virgo side of Mercury organizes the knowledge and builds upon the knowledge that Gemini provided. Again, we're going to unpack that a little more as we go along. But needless to say, Mercury here as a ruler of Virgo has to do with making things work. You know, how do we make our life work? How do we manage to have enough food for winter? How do we manage to avoid predators? How we're going to build a solid shelter. So all these things that require skills and preparation and function is related to that, which of course is why the sixth house and Virgo relate to the routine of our lives, because your daily schedule as you wake up, you know, have a shower, have your breakfast, take care of your kids, all these functions help you basically lead a productive life. So your sixth house and your Mercury function tell us whether your life is functional, whether you manage to pay your bills, whether you manage to cure your diseases and your ailments, and whether you manage to produce and harvest from whatever you planted, or whether it's not functioning and you're not well and you don't have food on your table, etc. So Mercury is obviously related to this survival function as well. Then the seventh house, Venus and Libra, relate to the need to seek some help. The seventh house relates to all the things that we're really not good at, the things we do not have. And we need to cooperate with other people so they can provide those things we are deficient in. So where the Venus in Taurus relates to what we have, the Venus in Libra relates to what other people have and the exchange that needs to occur. That's going to be episode 3 of the Octaves. And so people wonder, you know, why do we suddenly move into Pluto, which is the most distant planet? Today it's called a dwarf planet. And how come, you know, this distant planet suddenly becomes the ruler of Scorpio, which is not the last sign? And it kind of is puzzling as far as the order of things. But as I've explained in the first episode, the reason why Pluto rules Scorpio, as Pluto basically is responding to a Mars crisis. So the Aries function of Mars has to do with our battery and our ability, you know, to have enough life force, life juice to keep us going. And of course, we need fuel, which is Venus, you know, the food, and we need air and oxygen and also gain strength. So we get to the point where we do go and study and figure things out and fend off predators and build our shelters, and life is functioning. But then we reach the Scorpio phase of existence and we realize that our battery is dying out and that our capacities are being exhausted. So Pluto takes us to the underworld. The underworld, symbolically, it can be a physical place where Pluto is literally under the soil. So the sewage, the aquifers, anything that is going to actually nourish what grows on the surface. So where Venus has to do with the beautiful flowers and the vegetables and the trees that are going to provide food, these are vegetables that grow roots, and they are feeding from the underworld. So it's a physical place, the underworld, but it's also a symbolic place where we are facing all that is not seen, all the strengths and vulnerabilities that we are comfortable with or not comfortable with. So Pluto is is responding to the fact that Mars in Scorpio, Mars is a ruler of Scorpio, is about to die, is about to run out of fuel, is about to face its limitations, be fired, so to speak, from your job. You're rejected, you are unwanted. And we go to the lowest place in our self-esteem, lowest place in our power, and we experienced a crisis, an existential crisis, whether we have enough to continue this journey or whether we have to give up. And so the outer planet here, Pluto, is the planet that will recharge Mars. So there's a transformation. Mars becomes Pluto. And what is Pluto? Pluto is actually a fusion of Mars and Venus. If you think about it, Pluto has the power of Mars, but has the appetite, the magnetism of Venus. Pluto is a relationship planet. So this fusion of Mars and Venus becoming this Pluto energy takes us from the lowest place to this transformation where we ascend from the lowest to a higher place. Now think about descent and ascension. We descended from the spiritual realms to birth, Mars, and we were birthed through the birth canal of our mothers. So that exit, that pushing out, is a Mars function. And so there is a rebirth in the 8th house. And that's the symbol of the phoenix rising from the ashes, from the underworld to the upper world. And that's why Scorpio is both symbolized by the snake and the eagle. So I'm repeating some of what was said in the first episode, but it's just to highlight how Pluto is the gateway to that second lease. What is happening in this second phase? We're moving from the descent to ascension. So Scorpio is this critical phase where we descended, came into being, into this world, and then faced the deepest roots, the deepest places of our psyche and our physical existence. And from there, the only way is up. So this is where the direction from descent to ascension begins. And this is why Jupiter and Sagittarius, who follow Scorpio, who follow that descent, feel so ecstatic, so optimistic, because the transformation occurs, and now you are a butterfly and you have wings and you feel empowered because you're starting to ascend again and you're reclaiming your spiritual identity. So all the way up to Scorpio, you were in your mortal identity, in the day-to-day, in this incarnation. Now, Pluto when we speak about the transformation, what is the transformation? What is really happening there? Pluto is realizing that we have a soul. And so we realize that we are not just flesh and bones, that we have a deeper identity. And so we start to see ourselves as a greater being that is living multiple lives through the soul journey. And so we realize through Pluto that we have a greater identity, and this informs our spiritual journey. This is where the spiritual identity is being developed, and we recognize we have a soul, and therefore life is not only about survival. It's not only about having kids, reproducing, planting the crops and harvesting. There's a deeper meaning why we're here, to bring light where there's darkness, to create the necessary changes, to serve the creation, not only to survive the creation, but to serve a greater purpose. So through Scorpio and the crisis point of, I'm dying, I'm at the end of my rope, the challenge of getting that new lease and getting that boost is a spiritual recognition. That's where the transformation occurs. And so from there, we move into the realm of Jupiter that gives us meaning, faith, that there's more to life than, than the suffering and the struggles and the famine or the little immediate gratifications. So we see a bigger picture. Then Saturn represents the fact that there is a higher order. There is a higher intelligence to this world, that our ego is aligned with a divine purpose. This is why we have a spine, right? So the connection between the lowest part of our body, the root chakras, to the crown is connected through the spine, and the spine, represented by Saturn, connects the lowest world and the highest world. And then we move to Uranus, and Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. And so we continue this journey of spiritual development, spiritual realization, because one of the functions of Uranus is actually awareness. The things that you realize, wow, I realize what life is about. I realize that there's a greater purpose. So all these things that you become conscious about, that you realize, are part of Uranus. But all the knowledge and the wisdom and this intelligence that Uranus represents needs a container. If you speak about the soul journey to someone who is just starting, if you speak about, complex equation to a first grader, they're not going to have the container to digest what you're talking about. So in order for your consciousness to expand in this Uranian development, you need to also expand your vessel, expand the container, which is Pluto. This is why Pluto must come first, because Pluto is about expanding the vessel, expanding that cup that will hold consciousness. And so whatever you receive from these higher worlds and from your daily experience in the lower world is contained in your vessel of consciousness. And Uranus represents the ultimate ascension. So if Pluto is the lowest rock bottom, where you touch on the deepest insecurities, you touch on the deepest wounds in order to heal them, in order to become a better being, how a crisis can become an opportunity, that's Pluto. And so from there you start, you ascend, and then from the bottom you rise as a phoenix. And Jupiter has to do with the horizon, how you're going to expand your horizons. And so you're galloping on the surface to new realization, to new meanings. And then Capricorn has to do with the mountain. So you're climbing now. You're not just galloping into the sunset. You are now going further up to the sky. And then you reach Uranus and Aquarius, which has to do with not only the top of the mountain, but the sky itself. So this is where you transform into a bird, and you launch the space shift and you travel to other galaxies, other, solar system galaxies, and who knows where. So Uranus represents the actual function of elevation, rising, ascension, which we're going to talk more about. And then Neptune represents the totality of life, everything coming from the same source. So whether it's up or down or sideways, the formlessness, the timelessness of life, where all the coding exists and where there is no time, there is no future. It's all happening simultaneously everywhere at all times with everyone. So it's that inconceivable place that is beyond the scope of our brain. Episode 3 for Neptune. So we understand why these outer planets were sequenced in such a way and associated with these signs. So even though in the solar system they're not, placed in that sequence and order, there is absolutely a logic to the fact that Pluto is actually not ruling the last sign, even though it's beyond Neptune. So Pluto rules Scorpio because Pluto rules that recharge. And if you look at the position of Pluto in the solar system, it is on that boundary between just before the Kuiper belt. So beyond Pluto are really massive amounts of objects, but they are all very different from the traditional solar system planets. So Pluto is kind of a gatekeeper. So as we focus on our octave relationship between Uranus and Mercury this time, let's just look at some astronomy, which is interesting and fascinating. The cycle of Uranus is about 84 years. So 84 years to circle the sun. And Mercury is 88 days. Interesting fractal there. Uranus pole is 42 years away from the sun. And then 42 years facing the sun. So because Uranus has a 98-degree tilt, I'm going to talk about that a little more. But you see that the Earth has a 23-degree tilt. So it's slightly, the pole is slightly leaning towards the sun at a 23.5-degree angle. But Uranus is 98 degrees. So for half of its cycle, 42 years, the pole is facing away from the sun, and then 42 years facing the sun. So you understand seasons are going to be quite radically different on Uranus. And that's interesting because Mercury has a tilt of only half to 2 degrees. Wait, one is 98 degrees and the other one is 2 degrees. Does that make 100? So because Mercury tilt is barely happening, there are no seasons on Mercury. And one day of Mercury, which means the time it takes for Mercury to actually rotate on its own axis, is 2 spins around the sun. So one day equals 2 years on Mercury. And that basically means that there's 88 days of sun and 88 days of night. And it's interesting that the Uranus, probably because of its composition, but also probably because of this tilt, is the coldest planet in the solar system, with a temperature that can reach 290 to 370 minus Fahrenheit. And Mercury is closest to the sun, so you'd think it's going to be so hot, but only the face of Mercury that is facing the sun is going to be super hot at 800 degrees Fahrenheit. But the side that is not showing, that is not facing the sun, is extremely cold, and it's almost as cold as Uranus. And Uranus, who is very, very far away. And even Neptune is not as cold as Uranus, even though it's further away. So interesting astronomical references that parallels, they both have these very long day-night experiences, and Uranus is mostly cold all the time, whereas Mercury has an immensely hot and immensely cold side. And Uranus happens to be 10 times, so that's an interesting scale, 10 times larger than Mercury. So showing the tilts from Astro Voyagers on Instagram, if you want to follow them, you see Mercury tilt is pretty much almost non-existent. They say here 0.03. However, I've read also that it is a 2, up to 2 degrees tilt. So it's basically constantly angular to the sun. Whereas Uranus, look at this one here, Uranus is almost, it's a rolling planet because it's tilted at 98 degrees. Um, and so you see the other ones, right? Venus is at 177 degrees. So Venus is kind of upside down. Jupiter is 3 degrees tilt. Saturn is 27 degrees tilt. The Earth is, as I said, 23 and a half. Mars is 25. And Neptune is 28-degree tilt. So let's understand the functions of Mercury. I briefly covered that, but I want to continue unpacking this interesting dynamic. Mercury is obviously relating to our mental faculties. So if Mars has to do with self-preservation and the instinct to be and to survive, and it's the will to exist, you know, it's that first spark of life. You are ignited with Mars. The spark is lit. Then Venus has to do with physical durability, sustainability, you know, being in your body and being able to stay in your body and being able to sustain your physical existence. Mercury has to do with developing the mental faculties, and mental faculties help you organize your life, understand when is the day, when is the night, where is the food, how it can grow. So Mercury is the observer who takes notes and starts to write a manual, because we came to this planet without a manual. We have to just figure things out as we go. And so all the knowledge that was passed often orally from many indigenous traditions, you know, the myth and the wisdom and the creation stories, first orally and then written down. Mercury is the scribe. And so it basically is the keeper of what we have figured out, keeper of knowledge. Because as we have knowledge, as we understand how life works, we can better prepare. We can anticipate. You know, if we know that a day is 24 hours and the night is going to fall after, you know, 12, 14 hours, we can prepare accordingly. If we know where the stream of water is, if we know how deep we can dig, if we know, knowledge gives you security. Knowing is a protection. It's part of survival. So the survival functions of Mercury is the mind and its knowledge. So Gemini is busy doing that. It's busy moving around. Mobility has to do with Mercury. You know, where Taurus has, you know, was concerned with finding a land that is fertile and growing things. Mercury is interested in what's happening beyond that space. What's happening with the neighbors, right? Mercury, Gemini rules the neighbors. What's happening with the neighbors? How we're connected. You know, the water stream is passing through, you know, different lands, and we need to each connect to that. So Mercury is naturally ruling two mutable signs, and Gemini and Virgo, and mutable signs have to do with interdependence, whereas fixed sign had to do with what do I have, who am I, you know, how do I produce. The mutable signs have to do with connectivity and with the fact that we all breathe the same air, and if if my neighbor is noisy, I'm going to hear it. If my neighbor is polluting the stream and dumping junk, that's going to affect my crop. So being able to understand where things are coming from and how they function and how we're all interconnected and we better get along is part of the Mercury function. So Mercury is developing this ability to decipher, to learn, to study life, and see how Mercury, Gemini, squares Pisces. Pisces represents the unknown, the great mysteries of life. So with Pisces, you have to surrender because you don't know. You are in the fog, you are in open seas. Everything is unpredictable. Mercury is not comfortable with that. Mercury is keeping the journal and taking notes so that we may build a pattern. And that's part of the Mercury function, is to track patterns. Every day is similar, but then the days are getting shorter with the season change and longer. So that is also something I need to track. It's getting how the temperatures are changing, how the environment is changing. All these data collection is Mercury. And that helps us make decisions. That helps us being better informed. If you know something, if you know when the train leaves, if you know what time they're going to distribute bread, you can be there. You can be in sync. And that's part of the Gemini function and Mercury function is, are you in sync? Are you dancing on the beat? Are you in the rhythm of life? So the ability to be part of the rhythm and to synchronize, just like traffic. Think about driving cars in all these intertwining roads and highways. If you're out of sync, you're going to have an accident. So being in sync allows for a better flow, allows you to get to destination, allows you to learn from others. So as an air archetype and the mental functions, you use your Mercury to connect every dot and realize all the patterns that form life. That life is a collection, it is made of patterns. So even math, 1 + 1 = 2 is a connection. You're connecting one thing and another to create a result. So that is part of the mutable nature of Gemini and Virgo and Mercury. The Virgo side of Mercury has to do with how we use this knowledge. Once Mercury has collected information and data, and we know how to plant, and we know when, and we know, where the water is going to come from, then we apply. So the 6th house and the Virgo function of Mercury is about how we develop our skills and how we use the knowledge to make sure that our life function, that we're not getting sick, that we have enough supplies, and that we're prepared for the challenges. So that very function of having a first aid kit, if you're going on an adventure, you need to have those pills, you need to have those, the gear, you need to have the right equipment, the preparation comes from knowledge. So when you're better prepared, Virgo, you have better chances of survival. Not only that, you have better chances of production, and you have a better harvest, which is all about the wheat sheaf that Virgo represents, the food, the harvest. So Virgo, Mercury has to do with how we organize our life, how we choose to make it function. Wherever your Mercury is how your routine looks like. So if we use, for example, Mercury in Leo, how is that Mercury going to organize their routine, right? How are they going to, first of all, absorb information? Naturally, Mercury in Leo will learn through action, through participation. Their creative capacity is their way to learn. They are not only going to memorize information. As they act in the play of life, things come together. Their intuition, their ability to connect dots, to figure things out, to understand, happens through a process of creativity. So if you want to teach a Leo Mercury kid, teach them through tools, through colors, through strong impressions, and of course through drama. If you just speak like a robot, one tone, Mercury and Leo is going to drift apart. But if you speak of highs and lows and very important dynamics, then just that intonation is going to make more sense to them. It's going to help them discern, absorb, and connect things. And what that's also, Mercury function tell us, what are we actually seeing? What are we actually paying attention? What are the details out of all that's in front of us? What are the details that we notice? So for a Mercury in Leo, they will notice behavior. They will notice personality, and anyone who comes with strong purpose, anything that has presence in this world, will capture their attention. So they may not be as perceptive to things that are more subtle. They may pay more attention to what is obviously expressive, out there. It's just, generalized example. And that's also how they lead their routine, right? A Mercury in Leo needs to not just have a boring routine of just mechanical functions. They will want to bring life to their everyday existence. How they cook breakfast, how they shave, how they take the children to school is going to be a ritual. It is going to have color and flavor, and they're going to make it interesting. They're going to make it playful, but also meaningful, because Leo needs purpose. Things cannot just be plain. It needs flavor and goals. So that's just, giving you an example of analysis. So Uranus represents as a transpersonal planet. It takes those personal functions, but on a spiritual, holistic level. And basically, what is mundane, what is part of this kind of mortal dimension, to the transpersonal, to what is of, the collective and the soul. So this need to figure things out, to know how life functions and to organize our existence is now translating through Uranus to a need, first of all, to understand our greater environment. If Mercury is learning about the neighbors, who's living next to me, and whose country is my neighbor, and whose continent is my neighbor, the Mercury function help us figure out how culture works, how everything is interconnected, and how we can, make better decisions once we have, the more knowledge we have, the more informed we are, the better decisions we can make. But Uranus takes that now to a larger context, to understand the science of life. What is science? First of all, science means that there is some kind of logic to all that exists. It brings cohesion to all the elements, to everything that is in nature. So the pattern is not only immediate for our survival, we start to understand patterns in the universe, patterns in all the scientific domains. So the environment is not only a terrestrial environment, it's a astronomical environment. We start to look at planets, we start to look at outer space and deep into the darkness of the sky. So it changes the scale of learning and the scale of observation to something of a larger magnitude and something that is beyond our daily routine. But most importantly, if Mercury is knowledge, information, data, and the use of that knowledge through skills, through function, Uranus takes that to a higher octave where we don't only have knowledge, we have awareness. And when I speak of awareness, I speak of, yes, data. Delhi is the capital of India and Canberra is the capital of Australia. And there are kangaroos living on that big island. This is information. But awareness has to do with what are the deeper meanings of our lives. So we begin with the science of what brought, the kangaroos to Australia and how the land masses shifted from the South Pole and were connected to South America and blah, blah, blah. So we start to see, the deeper, more ancient processes of science and the way the universe started. So Uranus continues this research and exploration and that journaling of life. And from the science, we start to also understand who are we as human beings? What are our functions? How do we operate? And how can we also improve our function? Where Virgo is going to want to improve function by saying, well, if I save this, the grains in the winter in a place that doesn't have moisture, It's going to last longer and it's going to be better preserved. So if I exercise every day, I'm going to be in better shape and I'm going to be healthier and live longer. So the Mercury function helps us improve on a day-to-day basis how to best use our bodies, our resources, so that we can survive better and produce more. But awareness from the transpersonal qualities of Uranus is a step forward where we have to improve as human beings, where there's a moral code where we can say, you know, instead of, you know, throwing our prisoners into prison just to punish them, let's perhaps educate them. Let's give them hope and opportunity. So we want to not only do things efficiently, but we want to also advance human qualities, elevate. Remember that ascension, elevate the function of our human faculties. And so if I'm going to have an argument, Uranus is going to say, instead of using fists, I'm going to use dialogue. I am going to bring more civility, more awareness that violence, you know, will not make me smarter, will not make me stronger. It's going to backfire. So that consciousness, that awareness comes from knowledge, comes from culture, comes from developing our brain, really. And so it is part of realizing that we're not just here to survive, we're not just here to, you know, be, you know, live our 70, 80 years and then be done with it. But there's a higher spiritual purpose to our life, which is the function of these transpersonal planets. Let's explore this. So from the personal of Mercury to the transpersonal of Uranus, both of them are mental. So they represent the mental abilities, where Mercury represents the mental ability to learn and figure things out and understand. Uranus represents the mental ability to realize and to innovate and create. So we're not only learning about what exists, but we are producing new things through Uranus. You're going to get there. Where Mercury is the mind, Uranus is the higher mind. Self-awareness, the ability to self-observe. So Mercury, I'm observing life, taking note of all the occurrences. But Uranus, I'm not only observing life and developing science, I'm also observing myself. I have that absolutely advanced capacity to doubt myself, to review myself, and to rectify myself, which takes immense awareness. You know, most species are not able to look at themselves in the mirror and recognize themselves. So think about the fact that both Uranus and Leo, that polarity of Aquarius, Leo, and Uranus Sun, represent mirrors. So the Leo mirror has to do with recognizing yourself and seeing yourself in order to be proud of yourself. You like the image. Whereas the Aquarius and Uranian mirror has to do with the ability to look at yourself from an outside perspective, from an objective perspective. So as if you were someone else looking at you, and you can learn so much about yourself this way. So we mentioned that ability to understand and realize. That's a repetition. Mercury represents naming, language, words, data, and patterns, identify, organize, communicate, and bridge. Let's unpack that. That's a very important segment. How do we name things? Why do we name this computer a computer and this table a table? How do we name a tree? We first of all need to recognize it. So when your mind is able to make distinctions, that's a leaf, that's a bird, that's another kind of bird. The more you notice things, the more your vocabulary expands. So you're going to have many words, many names for each bird and each foliage and each type of soil. So the more discerning you are, the more perceptive you are, the more your vocabulary expands, because you'll notice things and you will name them. You know, I always say this, there is no name for karma in Western culture, because Western culture is not concerned with reincarnation. So they don't understand this concept of karma. It had to be imported from Indian culture, and Middle Eastern culture also have words for that. So whatever word you use is what your culture has discerned, identified, and developed. So the richer the vocabulary, the more obviously intelligent that culture will be. And when you have words, you have sound, and sound, obviously air creates sound. Mercury, Gemini is an air sign, so you can be in sync, talking about being in sync with other people, as you can explain yourself, as you can ask questions, or you can provide answers. So communication helps us not bump into each other, but synchronize and cooperate. But Uranus is not only naming things, it's identifying, but it's now creating new things, new paradigms. You know, it represents the amalgams. When you're fusing things in nature that were not naturally connected, how you are creating, you know, bronze by fusing iron and, you know, another metal, and you know, that's the Bronze Age. And one of the functions of bronze was that it was not eroding as quickly as other metals, and so it provided more stability to the development of civilization. So that's when the human mind, as it learns about itself and self-observes and learns about the science of life and the greater universal riddles, it can then also become co-creator. And it can start fusing things in nature that at least not immediately connected. You know, it's like, think about how you can sometimes, even in cooking, can mix flavors that are not immediately making sense. You know, are you going to mix the salt with the sugar? They don't seem to work together, but Uranian folks are going to bring recipes where there's salty chocolate, right? Where you mix flavors in all kinds of different ways. So you are creating new paradigms, new connections, and you're developing the world. That is also very visible when we go back to the natural wheel. You see that from a Virgo point of view, there's a quincunx between Virgo and Aquarius. And that quincunx, you know, if you speak to a traditional astrologer, they say these signs don't see each other. They have nothing in common. They don't share an element. You know, one is earth, the other one is air. They don't share a mode. One is mutable, the other one is fixed. So they really have nothing in common. And yet they complement each other, but they complement by being so different. And of course, they have a mental connection because they're both intellectual signs. But that inconjunct is part of the way Uranus works. Uranus blends things that are not necessarily immediately connecting, you know, easily in nature. And it creates all kinds of new functions, new realization, new resources that can be used. So if we combine, you know, what is Mercury and Uranus together as a unit? What are they about? They are about greater understanding of life. They are about civilization. And think about the fact that the more you know, the more science you have, the more you become independent from fate. Because fate means you can't control, things happen to you. But if you have knowledge, you gain more control. And then your will expands. So you diminish the effect of fate, and that's part of the function of Mercury and Uranus. As our brain expands, think about the brain being the tallest organ, right? It's up here. It's talking about elevation. You know, the brain is the one that is the most elevated. And there are two bottoms, you know, there is the sexual organs, and then there's the soles of the feet. One is Pluto, the other one is Neptune. So as they work together, you know, people with strong Uranus Mercury functions are very good with mental analysis, decoding, finding patterns, sorting the chaos for order. That's exactly what Mercury and Uranus try to do, is to eliminate chaos so that we can bring order, so that we can get organized, so that we can function better, so that we don't collapse unexpectedly, so that we prevent crisis, diseases, and we can improve the quality of life. So that's exactly the purpose of Uranus and Mercury. As we advance civilization, we increase human potential and we improve the quality of life. Perspective. Talk about elevation. The higher you go, the more you can see. So where Mercury has feet, to go places and find out, you know, Mercury is the traveler. there's a mistake in thinking that Mercury is only going to bicycle in the neighborhood. Mercury loves to travel. You know, Gemini people are multicultural. They love, you know, traveling to foreign cultures because they love to learn. So where one is using their feet to go places and learn, Uranus is using the wings to fly above and to see everything from the bird eye view. And when you have these perspectives, then you can find solutions. You know, if the Chinese, I don't know, they had different spices and they discovered powder, you know, let's import that to Europe so that we're going to benefit from something that happened in another continent. And the more you can collect information and figure things out, the better you're going to manage your crisis and control situations better. There's obviously the risk of overthinking and always being in your head, not doing. That's a Mercury-Uranus problem. They represent the nervous system, so very nervous because it has to do with brain function, constantly, you know, being stimulated through the eyes. Interestingly, the eyes are the sun, light. But whatever the eyes capture, the brain organizes and interprets. So the interpretation is in the brain, whereas the impression and the stimulation is from the eyes. So there can be a lot of nervousness, you know, and any kind of nervous condition, as well as degenerative nervous conditions, can be Uranus-Mercury related. But the gain is advancement and modernization and sophistication, quality of life, civilization, acceleration. You know, we often think about Uranus as relating to human rights. Why? Because human rights, animal rights, is part of the advancement of civilization. You know, you're not going to throw gay people off of rooftops because you don't understand them, or you know, you think they're a distortion. You're not going to enslave people just because they have dark skin and you think they're animals. So that ability to realize, to better understand the complexity, the diversity of life, and to understand human function, human suffering, human quality of life, you move beyond the personal to the transpersonal, where you realize that providing human rights will elevate the vibration, the quality for everyone involved. So your freedom is not at the expense of someone else's freedom. What we're talking when we speak about civilization, Uranus has to do with developing the minimum standard. So as we elevate, we develop our human brain functions. But what do we elevate? Some people are already on the top. Some people are wealthier. Some people are smarter. Some people are more powerful. You know, we always, there's always a hierarchy of who has the most refined, the most delicious, the most advanced, whatever it is, knowledge, weapons, food, tools. But Uranus has to do with developing all this, but offering it so that everyone has the minimum. Everyone deserves clean water. Everyone deserves an education. These are standards that improve with modernity and time. So the biggest fear of Mercury and Uranus is when there's savagery, when we revert back to primitive modes of conducts, where we go back from the dialogue to using fists, or even worse, torture, and the brute aspect of humanity. So obviously these are very social archetypes. They're both air oriented, Aquarius and Gemini. And Virgo, even though it's not an air archetype, is still very mental, intellectual. So interdependence, the ability to rely on others, to listen, and to learn as a group, to learn in a classroom, to learn from each other. And then from a Virgo point of view, the ability to cooperate. We each have work to do. And as an astrologer, I rely on someone who provide a software. I rely on Zoom to provide the video platform. I rely on other people's services to make my work function. So we're all in an interdependent reality. Now, Mercury and Uranus are also the witty, because they're so perceptive and they are able to reflect on themselves. There's a satirical humor. And obviously, vocabulary, sophistication, language, education, very much part of it, which also brings sophistication, modernity. They are going to be more refined. Refinement is Mercury Uranus, as opposed to, again, like we said, the brute, the primitive, the gross, the raw, the the one that's not refined. The shadow side of all that is snobbery, boredom, conceit, and elitism, sarcasm. The feeling that you're smarter than everyone else, the feeling that everybody's stupid and how they're not getting it, and the loss of patience because, I'm so bored, you're boring me, and that feeling that I'm always more advanced than you and you're not catching up with me. And then experiencing that myself, where I feel like self-conscious because I'm afraid that I'm not smart enough, that I'm not catching up, and that I'm not meeting those expectations. So that is part of the shadow side of this octave relationship. So continuing the difference between Mercury and Uranus, where Mercury organizes and it's about dexterity, maintenance, management of day-to-day, Uranus thinks about the future, about how we create a better life and how we elevate the function of our lives. So it's not only about continuing the routine of what we have established, but it's about transforming. Progress is Uranus. We used to have room-size computers. Now we have little phones that process information much faster, more efficiently, and smaller in size. So that complexity of size, speed, and capacity is what constantly helps us process things faster and go beyond. Because if we can go faster, we can also go farther. You know, if our probes, you know, space probes are, you know, able to go to the moon, and now they're able to go to Mars, and they're able to go to Uranus, maybe we're going to go to other galaxies. The faster we can go, the more compact, the greater the achievement, because we keep defying, as we elevate, we keep defying gravity. That's part of what Uranus is about. So Mercury is still bound to gravity, and it's still bound to creating systems that are strong, that are efficient, but are about establishing. Uranus is about advancing. So where Mercury is trendy, fashionable, and, you know, Mercury people are foodies. They love the, you know, analyzing the spices and the flavors and the cooking, and they're very current with culture, you know, who's playing, and very aware, conscious, cultivated. Uranus is not just connected to the culture, but it's creating the culture. It's the trendsetter. It's the avant-garde. So it's ahead of the culture. So Aquarian people quite often feel alienated because whatever is current is already obsolete. Mercury on a brain function represents the left brain and the ability to discern, to organize. It's the critical thinking, which is an important function of human behavior. Critical thinking helps you discern, helps you know right from wrong, and helps you know what's tasty and what isn't, what's healthy and what isn't. But Uranus, you know, has to do with the complete function of the whole brain. You know, the brain is ruled by Aquarius and Uranus, not by Aries. You know, Aries is the head, not the brain. Okay. So all the electric and nervous system is ruled by Uranus. And think about how the ignition of the heart, Leo, is actually an electric pulse. Aquarius, brain. That connection between Aquarius and Leo, Uranus and Sun, is immediate. What is electricity? You know, I mentioned in the previous slide, well, Mercury represents the motion and terrestrial neighborhood. Mercury is the function of the atom, the electron, the neutron, and the proton, and how they interact to create an atom. But electricity depends on the motion between atom and atom. So how the electron has to jump from one atom to another and to another and create this kind of charge and motion that releases energy is the Uranian function. So if Mercury is the atom, Uranus is the interconnection and the motion of friction between the atom that generates energy. And that brings light to the world. Think about, again, another polarity where the sun, Leo, represents the sunlight, the natural light, whereas Uranus, electricity, and Aquarius represent artificial light, how we created light in the night. Fascinating. Now, the most important premise here, where Mercury represents the ability to operate within the creation, as you know how to chop wood, and you know how to create weapons and grow food. You learn all these things. Uranus represents the ability to create a world. Invention, awareness, and sophistication leads us to the ability to basically govern existence. Think about how science takes away the mystery. We haven't figured out how astrology works. We see the results that it works. We don't know the mechanism yet. So the science is not there yet. But the moment we figure things out, we can control them. So Uranus is about our ability to not only advance our civilization and advance and expand our brains, but it's our ability to also create worlds and to become creators of nature. How we interfere with nature. Some people will say we shouldn't touch nature. Nature is Neptune. It's wild. But we all appreciate not dying from diseases, not being exposed during a hurricane. We all appreciate that over time, as we developed our vegetables, they are more packed with vitamins, and they are more flavorful. So if we go back to the Stone Age, things were not as developed as they are now. And I'm talking about nature as well. So there's a lot of controversy around, whether we should or not, but we have. And it is part of the human function to not only be part of life, but to develop life. And how far will this go? We're entering the age of Aquarius. And you can be sure that in a decade or two, we're going to be able to be more precise about the embryos and the genetic coding and the prevention of diseases and the ability to reverse degenerative disease through stem cells. So we're constantly playing God. And that's a Uranus function. This is why in the natural wheel, Uranus comes after Capricorn. Aquarius comes after Capricorn, because you first of all need morality, ethics, to be able to play God and press the buttons and control the universe. So something to think about. Now, speaking about Aquarius, it has this traditional ruler of Saturn and the modern ruler of Uranus. So Saturn rules Capricorn, which is the higher order. Through Capricorn, we learn that life is not just about us, that it's not just about our will. It's not enough to want something. It needs to be aligned with the higher order. So you can wish forever to eat chocolate all day. It's going to make you sick eventually. So Saturn teaches us that life is not just about what we want, it's about what works. And when we combine that, the want and the work, then we are at peace with Saturn. So it brings rigor and it brings consequences that when we are not aligned, when we stray from a higher order, we suffer. We have pain, we have diseases, things start to fall apart. And Saturn doesn't only speak about the function of physical laws, it also speaks about the morality and ethics, integrity. So it is about the maturity to learn from experience what works from what doesn't, what is appropriate from what isn't appropriate. When we pay the consequences of certain behaviors, or when our children pay for these consequences of what their parents did, it's a Saturn lesson. This is why Saturn represents the wisdom of experience, what our parents learn and what they can teach us, so that we don't have to start from scratch and relearn life over and over again. We can pick up from where they left off. And so the next generation builds on what their ancestors developed. So Saturn is about that, creating society, because we understand there's an order, there are rules, some things work, some things don't work. And we keep redefining these rules. How so? The second, the fact that Saturn co-rules Aquarius, it brings the fact that there's diversity in society. This is why Aquarius has to do with groups, parties, and community. So in a society, you have the governors, you have the leaders, you have those who legislate, the chiefs. But then you have the community of scientists and the church community and the community of agricultures, of farmers, and the community of those different grouping of people who among themselves have their own society and their own rules. If we speak about the community of astrologers, who is setting standards, who is organizing conferences, how do we make those decisions within those subcultures? So the Saturn component of that within Aquarius is that each of these subgroup has its own rules, own hierarchies, and eventually contributes to the greater whole of the function of society as a whole. Saturn is also impersonal. As we mentioned, Saturn represents what is not just about you, but it's about how we all work together and what works, whether we like it or not. So that's also some kind of objective quality that we need in Aquarius. But where is Uranus really taking Aquarius to its true identity, to its fuller identity, is that it's not just about creating a society, but it's about developing society. As a fixed sign, Aquarius has to do with development. All fixed signs, Leo is about personal development. Aquarius is about society's development. And the innovation and the fact that we are advancing civilization, changing the rules. Saturn is the rules that we test, but Uranus shatters the old paradigms because it brings new realization. Where is the new realization coming from? As we elevate, as we ascend in our consciousness, we're able to understand more complex dynamics. So what we are now able to perceive is a result of a level of ascension that helps us tap into finer frequencies that were not accessible before, just like your phone is now able to do multiple faster functions than a computer in the 60s. The same thing now, our brains are able to compute more information, are able to figure things out and realize things that previously were beyond our scope. That is why we become more understanding, more tolerant, and hopefully better human beings. So as Uranus develops those new pathways, those new brain functions, it taps into spiritual realms that were not accessible in earlier times, or maybe they were and they were lost and now we recover them. But needless to say that Aquarius has to do with the revolution, and the revolution is a revelation. Why we are toppling the old regime, why, when Uranus was discovered in the 18th century, we had the American Revolution and we had the French Revolution, and it was basically the beginning of democracy, in modern time, and the end of these totalitarian hierarchies where you had one king who was supposed to be the conduit to the divine, because that was hugely corrupting. These kings had too much power and they ended up basically misusing it. So Uranus comes along because there's a new realization. So it's about modernizing. So that is a function of Uranus. It doesn't come from Saturn. So Saturn is just not going to fully capture the essence of Aquarius. It's only partially, capturing that. Whereas Uranus brings not only the wisdom of advancement and new realization, it also brings the wisdom of the current times, which means that the younger generation can also teach the elders. The same way you see, these young kids being able to teach their grandfathers and grandmothers how to use a phone and how to program an app. That is a Uranian function because they are wired differently. And so the wisdom of the elder has to adapt to the wisdom of the younger generation. And that's the meeting between Saturn and Uranus, this multi-generational exchange. So we understand now better this equation. And now, I use this chart in the previous Pluto episode of the Octave, and I refer to Ilya, who is the inventor of OpenAI, how he has all the planets that are at an octave relationship conjunct one another. Venus, Neptune, Mercury, Uranus, and Pluto, Mars, which is very, very unique. And so he's better known in his Uranian function as an inventor and his ability to develop, science and technology and the virtual world of AI, where robots, complement biological human function. So the machine and the organic and the virtual need to fuse together. So, that is a very interesting concept in his chart, because Uranus and Mercury have everything to do with speeding things up and with enhancing brain function, perhaps with the use of technology, where we're going to have implants and machines that will enhance what we cannot produce at this time biologically. But look where his north node is. It's in Taurus, which is the sign of the meat and potatoes, of the sign of the physical, the descent, the most basic expression of incarnation. So, he's coming from these upper worlds, but his lesson is actually to descend and to come back to the organic, of course, by harmonizing, connecting what is biological, what is physical, versus what is transcendental and beyond biology. Another interesting example is Twitter. Twitter was initially a social platform created under Uranus-Mercury conjunction. And I mean, Twitter, a bird tweeting, how many characters, 160 something, short, quick, concise, very Mercury-Uranus. It's in Pisces. Everybody, Pisces is beyond boundary. So it's something that really captures the masses. But the very function of tweeting, the speed and the limitation of words to say something in just a certain amount of character is so much that Mercury Uranus. And we know that Mr. Musk purchased Twitter and reinvented it into X. And guess what? The day that Twitter became X, on July 23rd, 2023, there was an exact square between Uranus and Mercury. So what is the square? What is it about? When we see them together, yes, it's all about mental expression. It's all about figuring things out. It's all about elevating, the human function to advance our brains, our behaviors, and to advance civilization. But how does Mercury, the lower octave, need to talk to Uranus, the higher octave? Uranus speaks about the higher function, but Mercury verifies that it can actually work. If we go back to the wheel here, Uranus speaks about this higher concept, higher realization, speaks about the future. But Mercury says here, wait a minute. You are speaking about these fancy ideals. Do I need a job? I need a harvest. Does this higher knowledge and higher mind and lofty ideals, are they practical? Can they actually be incorporated? So Mercury, in its lower octave, is going to be a test for Uranus to be integrated into the routine. You know, will these fancy phones be actually accessible to everyone in society? That is a function of Mercury. So Mercury will say, yes, this is useful, this is accessible, this is practical, this knowledge is really making our lives better. And if it's not, then Uranus becomes dangerous. It's the Frankenstein. You know, it's that idea that you can create all kinds of machines that make life more complex, less practical, and complicated. So there's a constant interrelationship between the transpersonal and the personal. It's not only going one way, it goes both ways. So if we see Elon Musk, you know, taking Twitter, and a concept that eventually, you know, initially worked, it was a very popular platform. And look at Mars was also squaring all that in Gemini. Talk about speed and concise and verbal aggression. You know, Twitter is known to be this platform where everyone fights with words. But then he turned into X, and the square now speaks about the tension between whether the new concept can actually be practically accessible, whether people will actually use it. And we know that Elon Musk speaks a lot about free speech, about the fact that the previous platforms, you know, the Facebook, are censoring and they're controlling the narratives. And so there's a concern about censorship. But now, you know, X has turned into a platform where there's more and more what we may call deviant content being tolerated. Same thing with Telegram, where this aspiration to support freedom of speech speak about Uranus, human rights, speech, Mercury. Everybody should have the prerogative to express themselves, unless you're posting, you know, videos of torturing animals or raping people, right? So where is the balance of free speech? There is more and more deviant content on these platforms. And that is the test of that Mercury-Uranus, as well as Saturn. So Saturn in Twitter was in Leo. In X, it's in Pisces. Saturn in Pisces doesn't have boundaries. It is not well regulated. So we'll see how this unfolds. Interestingly, as well, between Twitter and X, is that here the sun is on the north node, is 1 Aries, and it squares Pluto. And in X, the sun opposes Pluto at 1 Leo, trining Twitter's 1 Aries and square the nodes. So this Pluto Sun interplay with the nodes is going to be interesting. Another very relevant example is Malala Yousafzai, who is this Pakistani female student who spoke against the Taliban's who were trying to stop education for young girls. So she was a voice, an activist who wanted emancipation, freedom for young girls to study and to educate themselves freely. And here she is born with this Mercury-Uranus opposition. We talked about Mercury in Leo and how everything they do in their routine needs to have purpose and meaning. And so her life needed to have a meaning. She was called to this higher cause. And what is the Uranus function? But to elevate the rights of education, to allow an emancipation, the advancement of civilization, to include, to change the prejudice, oppression against women. Of course, this is also combined with a Mars moon, women's rights, fighting for the cause of the female, of the feminine, opposing Saturn, which can, in some cases here, Saturn in Aries, an aggressive, oppressing authority. But the Uranus Mercury is how she is striving to elevate the vibration, elevate the standards, and especially with anything related to education, Mercury. Another fascinating example, of course, Johannes Kepler, who was born with a conjunction in Capricorn, Uranus, Mercury, ruling his ascendant, and Neptune and Jupiter and Moon in Gemini. And so we know Kepler was a genius. So definitely higher mind, but the ability to also combine calculus, measurement with outer space, Uranus, understanding our greater neighborhood. So Kepler, was active during the Copernican time, right after, where we finally realized that, it was established probably before, but that's when it became really established in our Western culture that the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. So we are not the center of the universe. So that's like we say, the ability to step aside and to look at ourselves and see we are not the center of attention. Very Uranian Aquarian. But beyond that, he identified that planets don't only move around the sun in a perfect circle, but in an ellipse, which means they move far away and then closer. They have eccentricity in their orbit, and then they're going to be faster when they come closer to the sun. So he expanded on the current established notion, which is Mercury is about, what do we learn at school? And Uranus is about the revelation that there's something more, that we now are able to have wider, higher understanding. So it's building on the foundation of the previous body of knowledge. Nietzsche, philosopher, also born with a Mercury-Uranus opposition, claim, the death of God would eventually lead to the realization that there can never be a universal perspective on things, and that the traditional idea of objective truth is incoherent. So, in short, what Nietzsche was saying is that where Uranus is trying to be detached and objective, to understand something without bias, Nietzsche says that's impossible. So it takes a great amount of self-reflection to admit that you cannot be objective, ever. That doesn't mean there is no higher intelligence, call it God. But it does mean that it's a complex realization. So see how he's struggling between, or he's showing the human struggle between the personal Mercury with a transpersonal Uranus. Can we really detach? And then Jupiter is there in Pisces, and obviously Jupiter in Pisces is all about God. It's all about the mystical realm and the higher intelligence. So Uranus being conjunct with Jupiter shows this battle between science, spirituality. This is Elon Musk's, one of his children, one of his many children, born Mr. X, long name, but simplified to X, born with his son, sandwiched between Uranus and Mercury. And you see it's a very mercurial chart as well, with Virgo rising, Mercury-Uranus chart. So the child is mostly air, earth, which obviously, he's born to a dad who is very much into advanced technology, advanced, outer space exploration, and new forms of energy on this planet. So you bet that this child is really going to follow his father's footsteps in wanting to change paradigms, in wanting to use Taurus resources in a completely new way. But yeah, is he a space alien incarnated? Left to be seen. Now, what I also suggest as part of learning about charts is to see, when you have charts where you have an emphasis of the Mercury-Uranus themes, which means a repetition of Gemini, a repetition of Virgo, a repetition of Uranus, a repetition of Aquarius. So all, these themes, whether it's the planet, whether it's the sign, or whether it's the house. So planets, Mercury, Uranus, signs, Gemini, Virgo, Aquarius, houses 3, 6, 11. When you see in chart that these themes are repeating, such as Amalia's Earhart, who was the first female pilot, you see tons of Gemini. Mercury on her nodes, a planet on the nodes is always strong. 2 planets in Virgo, and then Uranus conjunct Saturn, the rulers of Aquarius, together. You know that she kind of responds to that type, this Uranian Mercury type. And lo and behold, right? she is this lady who defies the stereotypes of what women are doing in her times. And she says, I'm going to fly and I'm going to learn how to, at a time where we just invented planes, planes were recent in our civilization. And so she took on this challenge because she had a brain who could understand this, who had that mobility, and who wanted to defy also the social stereotype of women's roles. Another interesting example is Barack Obama, who is also a very much a type of Uranus Mercury. That's the inner wheel chart is his natal, and then the outer one is when he was elected the first time in 2008. So you see his Aquarius rising, South Node in Aquarius, Jupiter in Aquarius, and the ruler Uranus is on his node. So again, any planet on the node is very, very powerful. On top of that, he's a Gemini moon, and he has a strong 6th house, which is a mercurial house. Not only that, but his sun is the midpoint between Uranus and Mercury. And that sun was aspected by the South Node when he was elected. Don't let anyone tell you that South Node transits are bad, because that's one of many proofs that South Node activation can definitely be powerful. But whatever the case, 13 Leo is the midpoint between the Uranus, Mercury. So you see how his sun and those nodes kind of compacted, fused the Uranus, Mercury energy. And when he was elected, there was a Uranus-Saturn opposition, which obviously speaks about what he represented, especially after the Bush administration years and the war in Iraq. He was this young Black person who defied the trends of who can be president in the United States. So he was a breath of fresh air, bringing new ideas, very Aquarian, and defying the old guard and the old structure. So he broke a pattern by being the first Black president elected. But he was also very Aquarian in his personality, growing organic food in the garden of the White House and wanting to reshape healthcare. Whether he succeeded or not, is what Mercury will test. Will these lofty ideals actually be practical and accessible? So very much part of that Uranus-Saturn opposition, and the fact that he was elected on this North Node in Aquarius. Natally, he has Saturn quincunx Uranus exactly. So he's very responsive to any Uranus-Saturn aspects. What I'm trying to say is that he showed the fact that African Americans are not inferior, that they are advanced, that they are sophisticated, that they are smart and educated. And he changed the stereotypes for many people who, had preconceived ideas. So that level of not only, being elected, but also educating people, making people realize that, the color of skin is just that. Just like the same thing as the color of your eyes. It doesn't determine your capacity or your intelligence. So, but one of his obstacles was that quite often he was too idealistic, and many people felt that he couldn't reach them. A lot of his reforms were met by constant obstacles because of that. So I hope Uranus Mercury octave is now better understood, how this interplay works, how they're linked, and how important it is to consider them as a pair and to consider those signs that are not necessarily in friendly aspects in traditional terms. Gemini squares Virgo, Virgo quincunxes Aquarius. There's a lot of seeming stress, but these folks actually get along very well. The Gemini and the Aquarian and the Virgos, they are on the same wavelength because they are built of the same material, of the same substance, of the same vibration. And that is the vibration of the mind, the emancipation, and advancing our civilization. They are the problem solvers of the zodiac, and they are the ones who develop our intellectual capacities. If you would like to study more, you can not only join the full course, but you can go to my website and choose selected workshops that you may find more interesting. Learning about the past life dynamic, finding dates, the electional astrology. So there's many topics that you can choose from. And of course, I recommend the books that I have written, and we're going to speak more extensively on episode 3 about the Neptune paradigm. So blessings. Thank you, and subscribe to the channel. This will help me provide more free content. So thank you for not just watching the videos, but actually subscribing to the channel. Many blessings.